A lot of people think that writing a screenplay is one of the most difficult jobs in filmmaking. And it's certainly not easy, but if you break it down into smaller, more manageable parts, it's not as difficult as it may seem at first. In this video, I'm going to discuss the basic structure of a screenplay, specifically the mini-movie method, which I used to write the screenplay that would eventually become Once Upon a Time in the Apocalypse. I'm going to go through the movie and highlight those spots that demonstrate that structure at work. And I'm going to talk about how I might have bit off a little more than I could chew, and things didn't always go as planned. But first, there is no one correct structure. There are conventions, there are viewer expectations, especially with each genre, but there is no one way, no one set of rules that must be followed. That said, structure is a scaffolding, and it can help to release our creativity. Zero constraints, zero structure, that can be overwhelming, and we freeze up and we don't even know where to start. Now, if you've heard anything about screenplays, you've probably heard about the 3-act structure. That's certainly helpful, but it's really easy to get lost in that second act. The mini-movie method breaks that 3-act structure down into 8 mini-movies. Just write each mini-movie, put them together, and you've got yourself a screenplay. Simple as that. So let's see how this played out in Once Upon a Time in the Apocalypse. First, we have Act 1. Now, this is the setup. This breaks down into movie method. This breaks down into mini-movie 1 and mini-movie 2. Mini-movie 1, that's the protagonist's status quo. We simply see what their life is like when the story begins. But remember, this can't be boring. You still have to grab your viewer's attention with an opening sequence. And I talked about this in the video I made about opening sequences. You've got to hook the viewer. So this doesn't mean let's just watch 15 minutes of a boring, mundane life before the call to adventure occurs. It helps to think of this in terms of the story arc. Now, this section shows us the flaws of the main character. What do they need to change? Who are they that their status quo needs to be challenged? Now, start of this movie, we're seeing our protagonist in their life. And we're seeing, okay, this is a strange world. They're searching through things. They're looking for food. There's dead people on the ground. Okay, they're fighting people. They're killing people. What is going on here? Halfway through Act 1, which is the transition between mini-movie 1 and 2, is the Inciting Incident. Now, this could be called the call to adventure, a call to action. It's the thing that challenges the protagonist's status quo, the thing they are afraid of and they want to avoid. Here we see the inciting incident. Our protagonist, who is presumably a thief and a murderer, we don't know a whole lot about him yet, but he does not seem to be the greatest person. Here he comes upon a woman in distress, and is he going to do anything about it?
If I'm not mistaken.
No. He just watches. He literally wants to avoid conflict and only take care of himself. Now, mini-movie 2 is the character trying to find a way to ignore or run away from the inciting incident, from the call to action. They want to avoid conflict, avoid change. That could be a physical change or an emotional change or both. So in Once Upon a Time in the Apocalypse, the man, the protagonist, he comes back to his camp, and we see that he's we see he has a daughter, and she's interested in what's going on in the world out there. She's wondering if there's people out there, and he lies to her. He tells her there's nobody out there. We just have to stay hidden. We have to avoid people. This is how we're going to survive, is by being alone. Now, to point out something that is really important about this story, the main protagonist and antagonist of this story are the father and his daughter. They are both protagonists, and their main antagonist, the person who is trying to challenge them, is the other one. The father is being challenged by the daughter is being challenged by the father. Yeah, there's other bad guys, there's other things going to happen, but as I see this story, the protagonist and the antagonist are the father and the daughter, and they switch position in the film of who's the protagonist and who's the antagonist. If a person doesn't at least in some way see this conflict between the two main characters, they're not going to understand the movie at all. Which doesn't mean they'd have to be able to explain it the way I'm explaining it, but they should at least feel that conflict. Okay, so then the climax of Act One, which is the transition to Act Two, and it's the transition from mini-movie 2 to mini-movie 3, is the event that forces the main character to engage the call to action. Okay, they tried to run away, they tried to avoid it, but they failed, and now they're locked into it. The thing that has challenged their world cannot be avoided, and they're forced to face it. Here we see the father who's tried to hide, tried to keep his daughter hidden, tried to stay away, but now she sees there are people out there. That is going to put her on a trajectory to want to go and find those people, and it's going to force her father to have to face that. So mini-movie 3, the protagonist tries to take the easiest possible route to resolve the conflict. They're trying to defeat their antagonist with as little effort as possible, and they don't really want to face the problem, and they're still trying to avoid change. And of course they fail. So the father runs away again, tries to take his daughter to a new place, tries to make her forget what she's seen, tries to make her feel happy with just him, and life can be great with just the two of them together. Then we have this stranger who comes into their camp, challenges the father kills the stranger, and then even though with the flashback we've seen the daughter has been exposed to some of this horror in the past, he's been trying to keep her away from this, but now it's come right into their camp. She sees him completely for who he is and how he's acting and how he's being in the world. Abby, stop. And she hates him for it and runs away. In mini-movie 4, which ends at the midpoint of the story, and that midpoint is either a high point if the story ultimately ends in failure, or a low point if the story has a happy ending. In mini-movie 4, the protagonist develops the most grandiose and extreme plan they can think of. Again, without having to actually learn or change, without actually having to really confront the problem that is in their life. They're focused on this external issue, thinking that if they can just overcome that, then they're going to be okay. But the real problem, they're trying to avoid the real problem. And since most movies have a happy ending, once we get to that midpoint, this plan that the protagonist has developed goes horribly wrong. And it's usually because of the protagonist's flaw, the flaw that they need to change. And now another thing I'd like to point out that I was trying to do here, and I know that at least some people did not see this. At the beginning of the movie, I am trying to just play into the standard Western genre expectations, which have to do with the lone man who is a hero, and he's going to save the day, and usually he's going to save the woman who's in distress. Okay? Now, that is not what this movie is actually about. But I am playing into that genre trope and setting up the expectation that that is how this is going to go. And that all is summed up in this little scene here where Evie is still just saying, my daddy will save us. You know, we can trust him. He's going to save us. But that's not going to work out so well. And we've seen this in so many movies, not just Westerns, but so many action films, especially with a father and his daughter. The daughter gets kidnapped, and the father must go on this grand hero's journey to save his daughter. That's not what this movie is about. I set it up to look like that's what this movie is about, but that is not what this movie is about. The point of this story is to undermine that myth, which is a very strong myth in Western American culture. That lone male hero who saves the day. All by himself, nobody's help, he doesn't need anybody. So maybe you can guess what the actual point of the story is when I'm telling you that is not the point of the story. Okay, mini movie 5. The protagonist starts to finally realize that they must change. They must overcome the flaw that they have, the thing that's holding them back. They cannot overcome the antagonist if they don't. You're hopefully seeing how intertwined the protagonist's story arc is intertwined with the structure of the film. This is a whole lot easier to see in an action film. But if you remember that what is really important in a story is the main character's character arc, you can start to see how these plot points can also be expressed as emotional beats in a character-driven story. It may not be a physical cause and effect. It may just be an emotional cause and effect that drives the story forward. Now, often in this part of the film, mini movie 5, we see the protagonist retreating. Okay, if it's an action movie, they've nearly been killed. If it's a rom-com, they've been dumped, and the person they love has told them they never want to see them again. So they need to retreat, they need to regroup, they need to accept their need to change, and they come up with a new plan based upon the realization that they need to change. Now this is often the section of an animated movie when the kids start to get bored, or it's the section in the comedy where things start to get serious and the comedy is lost. Now, once upon a time in the apocalypse, in this section, we see the man, he loses. I mean, he genuinely loses. He's beat nearly to death, and he's left for death. Sure, he gets rescued, and then that would normally set up okay, he's going to recover, and then he's going to go back and save his daughter, but that's not what happens. He doesn't go and save his daughter. Instead, and this is where I probably was trying to do a little more than I could do in this movie. At this point in the story, we have a transition from the father being the protagonist to the daughter very clearly being the protagonist. And I tried to at least visually demonstrate that in this scene where we are at first seeing from the point of view of the father looking at his daughter, but by the end of the scene, we're in the daughter's point of view looking at the father. So I'm trying to visually, I don't expect this to be that obvious, but visually demonstrate the transition in the point of view of the story. And we're talking about character arc. The father, he wants to be alone with just him and his daughter hiding out in the woods, no help from anybody, trying to just be that lone hero who can take care of himself, self-reliant, doesn't need anybody else, versus the daughter who wants other people, wants help, wants community, believes that there's good people in the world, and it wants to go and find them. Okay, that's the main conflict. Being alone, trying to do everything yourself, versus finding community. That's the conflict. And we've shifted from the father who's trying to do it all by himself to the daughter who is still trying to find that community. It is that desire for community that actually, in part, got her in trouble. That's why she started talking to the Drac character, thinking that maybe he could help her, thinking that maybe he's a good guy, and getting stuck in this unhealthy relationship. So what's the answer for her? What should she do? Well, we'll see. So, all right, then we have mini movie 6. The protagonist puts their new plan into action. Now we're into the home stretch. The climax is in sight. The protagonist is going to face the antagonist. They've got a newfound hope and energy. They're headed for victory, but they're nearly defeated. This is the lowest point of the movie, when everything looks like it's going to be lost. And that's nearly the climax of the story. We are almost at the transition to Act 3 and mini movie 7. Just before the protagonist fails, they finally realize the final piece of what it is they need to change to overcome their flaw. The thing they tried to run from, tried to get past without having to actually face the real obstacle they must overcome. By doing that, their transformation can finally be complete. And the actualization of that transformation is the climax. Okay, so you might have been able to tell that at this part of the movie, I'm not following that exactly. We've lost our what appeared to be our protagonist. The daughter Evie still seems to be somewhat of a passive person, reacting to things, not taking charge. So is she just a woman in distress needing to be saved by other people? Well, you might have noticed that, yes, okay, other people are helping her. They're not all men, and it's certainly not one man who's going to be her savior. The father's a failure. This other man who she thought maybe he would help her, well, that doesn't seem to be working out too well. She is not only having to rely upon other people to help her, but she's also insisting on helping Maria. So it's not just her being passive, she's being active, and she's insisting on helping other people. She's insisting on community. And we see her active insistence on caring for Maria, which may have seemed incidental earlier in the film. Not only is she helping Maria, they're helping each other. Spoiler alert, Maria is going to help her. But before we get there, we're going to have one more Western trope, this final showdown between two men. And again, is it going to be a man who saves them? No. So instead, the climax is not a showdown between these two men. The women try, first of all, to talk to Drac. Try to reason with him and get him to leave them alone. They don't just turn straight to force. So like I said, the climax is the actualization of the transformation of the characters. Their story arc is reaching its completion. But before they do, they must come to a realization. And in Once Upon a Time in the Apocalypse, that is people helping each other. It's not one person who can overcome the evil by themselves. They must rely upon other people. They must work together. They must trust each other. They must help each other. So when we transition from the climax into mini-movie 7, the protagonist finally gets the upper hand over the antagonist, arriving at an apparent victory. It looks like they've won. It looks like everything is resolved and we're ready to wrap up the story. But wait a second. And this is the transition from mini-movie 7 to 8. The antagonist rises up for one final challenge. And this is the protagonist's chance to demonstrate they've actually changed. Their character arc is complete. And this is their chance to demonstrate that. And they defeat the antagonist. Now, I really didn't do this in Once Upon a Time in the Apocalypse, but it's really easy to see this in most Marvel movies. It looks like they've won. Oh, the bad guy's dead. Everybody's happy. Wait a second. Nope, he's not dead. And they got to fight him one more time, and then, okay, yeah, quickly, now they're dead. We see that a lot. You see that a lot in Marvel movies. Okay, so the bad guy's defeated, and everything's great, and the character arc is complete. This may not always look like a happy ending. The protagonists may not get what they want, or certainly not what they thought they wanted, but they should always get what they need. And what they need is dictated by the transformation of their character. So the conflict is resolved. The protagonist moves into their new world as the new person they've become. Or in a tragedy, they don't change. It looks like they might win, but nope, they fail. Because they refuse to call the action. They refuse the hero's journey. They refuse to transform into a hero. So their world falls apart because the inciting incident required them to change or fail, and they didn't change, and therefore they failed. Now, in the original screenplay for Once Upon a Time in the Apocalypse, there were some other things that occurred, and we shot some of that, and it didn't work out. So what you see still reflects the main idea of what's going on, and that is, okay, the dad, he's not dead. This is not a terrible, horrible ending. And that's partly because he still is completing his character arc. His complete and total failure is what then forces him to actually realize, okay, I do need these other people. Now, we see he's still reluctant. He's not completely changed, but he's moving in the right direction. And then, of course, Evie, the daughter, has completed her transformation. She is in the world that she desired, that she wanted, and that she was pushing her dad to, which is a world where you can trust other people, you work together, and you have community, and you look after each other. And that's that. The end. I've got more stuff to say about writing screenplays, but that's enough for now. I'll put those videos out in the future, so like and subscribe, and thanks.